Living Brave, Prosperity Through Inner Light, a Diwali story. This 1890 folklore from southern India was collected by Mrs. Howard Kingscote and Pandit Natesha Shastri. It has been adapted by Cultural Cafe Stories. In the town of Govindapati, there lived a wealthy trader named Pashupati Sethi, who had a son named Vishnu. In the same town, there lived another wealthy merchant named Ganeshwar Rao. He had a beautiful daughter named Garvi. Pashupati Sethi and Ganeshwar Rao were best friends and often met at each other's houses. Their children, Vishnu and Garvi, played together and grew up to be best friends. One day, while playing, both of them vowed to marry their children into each other's families and preserve their friendship forever, a practice that was common in those days. Garvi grew up to marry an affluent person and gave birth to 3 daughters, the youngest being Sunguni. Meanwhile, Vishnu and his wife had 3 sons. However, in an unfortunate turn of events, Vishnu's father died and his family fortunes vanished. But Vishnu, being a wise person, stayed calm in these difficult times and lived an honest life with the meager money he made. As time was nearing for Garvi and Vishnu to fulfill their vows, Garvi saw the penniless condition of her childhood friend and started to have second thoughts about marrying her 3 daughters into a poor family. Good fortune prevailed for Garvi as she received marriage proposals from 2 respectable family merchants. She gladly accepted them, and the marriage ceremonies for 2 of her older daughters were performed with pomp and gaiety. Sunguni, the youngest daughter, was next to be married. The news of the marriage of Garvi's 2 daughters disappointed Vishnu, as he never thought that his financial condition would cause his best friend to break the vows. In those days, such agreements were sacred and considered binding. Everyone in the town had known about Garvi and Vishnu's vow and criticized Garvi's actions. But Vishnu was sensible and kept quiet and accepted his fate. Sunguni heard about the broken vow through the townsfolk's conversation. She was a learned and sensible girl. When she came to know of her mother's action of breaking her vow, Sunguni felt disappointed and took it upon herself to reinstate the pride and honor of her mother's vows. She approached her mother with a determined voice and asked for her marriage to be arranged with Vishnu's youngest son, the rightful bridegroom for her. Mother, I have heard all the story about your vow to your childhood friend to marry us, myself and my sisters, 2 Vishnu uncle's sons. But I am ashamed to see you have unwarrantably broken it in the case of my sisters. I cannot marry anyone in the world except one of Uncle Vishnu's sons. You must make up your mind to give me your consent. Garvi was stunned to hear her youngest daughter talk like this to her. "You wish to marry a beggar?" she exclaimed. "We will never agree to it, and if you force me, I will marry you to the penniless pauper. But we will never see your face again." But Sunguni persisted. So her marriage to the youngest son of Vishnu was arranged. Vishnu had never spoken a word about it to Garvi, but he had waited to make matches for his children. When he heard that Sunguni was determined to marry his youngest son, he was very pleased. He soon fixed upon 2 girls from a poor family for his other sons and celebrated the 3 weddings. Everyday life continued for the members in the Vishnu house. Sunguni was as noble in her conduct as in her love for her husband. She was never proud or brash that she came from an affluent family. Nor did she ever disregard her husband, his brothers, or his father. Vishnu and his sons used to go out in the mornings to gather dried leaves. The leaves were then stitched into plates by his 3 daughter-in-laws. The male members of the family then sold the leaf plates in the bazaar for about 4 annas each. Sometimes these leaf plates would be worth more money, while other days they would be worth less. But whatever money the father-in-law brought home, his daughter-in-law used for the day's expense. The youngest of them was Sunguni, who spent the earnings most judiciously. She fed her father-in-law and his sons sumptuously. Whatever was left she made use of with her 2 sister-in-laws and lived most contentedly. And the family respected Sunguni greatly and had very great regard for her. But Sunguni often thought of her parents. As they had threatened, they never returned to see how their once beloved child was doing in her husband's home. Thus passed a couple of years. One day, the king of the town was taking an oil bath. He pulled a ring off his finger and left it in a niche in the open courtyard. A Garuda was flying in circles and, mistaking the glittering rubies on the ring for the flesh, pounced upon it and flew away. Finding it not to be flesh, he dropped it in Sunguni's home. She happened to be alone, working in the courtyard while her sister-in-laws and the others were in different parts of the house. She took up the sparkling ring and kept it. Soon afterward, she heard a proclamation made in the street that the king had lost a valuable ring and that any person who could find it and give it back to him should obtain a great reward. Sunguni called her husband and his brothers and thus addressed them. "My husband and brothers, I have the king's ring. Yesterday at midday, a Garuda dropped it in our courtyard. We must all go to the king, and before you 3, I shall deliver up the ring, explaining how I got it. When His Majesty desires me to name a reward, I will do so and beg of you never to contradict my desires, even if they appear very humble in your opinion." The brothers agreed, and they all started for the palace. They had great respect for Sunguni and were hoping for a good reward from the king. Once all three reached the palace, they handed over the ring back to the king with the explanation as to how they found it. His Majesty was charmed at the modesty and truthfulness of Sunguni and asked her to name her reward. "My king, I only request a slight favor from your Majesty. I would like this Friday night all the lights in the town or the palace to be extinguished. Not a lamp is lit, except our humble home, which we will light up with whatever we can afford." "Agreed, most modest lady. We grant your request and permit you to have a privilege you desire." Joyfully, she bowed before His Majesty and returned with her husband and others to her house. She then pledged the last jewel she had by her and procured some money. Friday came. She fasted all day and at sundown called her brothers and her husband. "My brothers, I have made arrangements for lighting up our house with 1,000 lamps tonight. 2 of you will stay up all night and watch the front of our house, and 1 of you will watch the back. If a woman of a graceful appearance and of feminine majesty wishes you to permit her to enter it, boldly tell her to swear first never to go out again. If she solemnly agrees to this, then permit her to come in. If any woman wishes to go out, make a similar condition that she must swear never to return at any time in her life." What Sunguni said seemed silly to the brothers, but they trusted her and waited to see what would take place. The whole town was gloomy that night, except Sunguni's house. The Ashtalakshmis, the 8 prosperities, entered the town at night and went house by house into every street. All of them were dark, and the only house lit up was Sunguni's. They tried to enter it, but the brother at the door stopped them and ordered them to take the oath. They obliged, and when the brothers understood that these ladies were the 8 prosperities, they admired the sagacity of his brother's wife. When the morning dawned, the prosperities had already taken up a permanent abode with the family. The rice bag became filled. The money chest was overflowing with money. The kitchen pot contained milk. And thus plenty began to reign in Sunguni's house from that day. The 3 brothers and her father-in-law were overjoyed at the way Sunguni had driven away their poverty forever. As for Sunguni's parents, they were remorseful for treating their daughter with disrespect and begged her to forgive them. She nobly granted it and lived with all the members of her family in prosperity for a very, very long time. The